Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webcast on the AWS Certified Solutions Architect certification. We're going to talk about what it is and how to get certified. My name is Jeff, and I'll be moderating the session today. But now let's go ahead and introduce Keytron. He is Infosec's VP of Portfolio and Product Strategy, and you've likely seen him on our previous AWS webinars and other events that we've had. So welcome, Keytron. Great to have you back.
Thanks. Glad to be back.
So as I said, we're going to try to keep this really packed and informational for you all so you can learn about these new AWS certifications that we're offering. Going to talk just a little bit about the AWS ecosystem so you can see where this particular cert fits in, talk a little bit about the job market. Then we'll dive into what's actually covered on the exam, talk a little bit about our boot camps and different ways you can train if you're interested in that, and then wrap up with your questions. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. These are the four AWS boot camps that we're currently offering. If you missed our first webinar, we are now an authorized training provider for live AWS certifications. So we have a series of webinars coming up the next couple of weeks talking about all these other certs. But for this 30 minutes, we're going to focus on the AWS Certified Solutions Architect. So I'll throw it over to you, Keytron, if you could explain a little bit what the cert is and give us a nice overview.
Sure. So the AWS Solutions Architect Associate is really kind of I would say it's really the entry level into technical AWS, right? So if you're actually trying to get into a situation where you're building out AWS solutions, taking an organization from a premise or a localized computing infrastructure to a AWS cloud infrastructure, this would be the certification that gets you geared up to start doing that and building out those types of solutions. Really, you get into learning about compute, networking, storage, AWS databases, and things of that nature. You really start to get a grasp of those principles of cloud, such as rapid elasticity, which essentially means if you need 1,000 servers for a day, you can build out and stand up 1,000 servers for a day and then bring them down at the end of that day and only be charged for that day. And that's actually a combination of rapid elasticity and something called metered servicing. So these are kind of some of the principles that make up cloud computing, and this certification and this skill set, which really aligns well with certification, is how you master and learn about those things. So that's really what the certification is all about. Can you take some requirements, some business requirements? Can you take the way that a business currently operates on a premise solution and build out the AWS equivalent of that solution? Now, that's kind of actually going and doing the hands-on work. Architecting it out and designing it from a higher level would be more of the solutions architect professional. But the associate, it's contrary to popular belief, a lot of people believe the associate is required before you do the professional. It's not. I really look at them as you're really focusing on two different skill sets.
Yeah, great. And I think it's interesting. I was actually looking at, if you Google the top highest paying, IT certifications, really interesting that AWS, these different certifications are all over those, top 10, top 20 lists. So really excited that we'll be now offering those for, our audience, for people who want it. I also thought it was interesting. I believe you said that you got the certification, way back when it first came out, like in 2013. So even though, in one sense, the cloud's newish in a way, this certification's over a decade old. And yeah, just a lot of, I know we talked about it on the previous webinar, but all these stats here really point towards what you were saying earlier about cloud skills, really being in demand and important. So I don't know if you have anything else you want to say about, just the job market when it comes to cloud skills, or what in particular, AWS certifications, if you're seeing anything, from different organizations out there.
Yeah, so I did get this certification very early on, but I also restarted, like when the new one came out in August 2022, I went ahead and I think it was around December of 2022, I went and took the latest version of it. and the professional version of it, just because I like to keep myself current on what's actually going on, and what the requirements are to be able to master this. But yeah, this is definitely one of the top certifications. And one of my messagings that have been something that I've been saying consistently for the last 5 to 10 years to every student that's come through our ecosystem that I interacted with is, whatever cybersecurity thing you're learning, if you can't marry that to knowledge and mastery of cloud technologies, you're going to find yourself in a situation where you're trying to play catch up in just a few years. And now we've reached that point, I think, to where it's pivotal. It's absolutely pivotal, and it's key to anyone that's involved in cybersecurity. You should now start your journey to marry cloud knowledge to whatever your cybersecurity skill set is. Like I said, I've been preaching it for years that it's coming. Well, now it's here. Like, we're at that point to where you just kind of have to do it. You need to do it now.
Yeah, do you feel, I'm curious to get your thoughts, because I feel like we've been talking about the cloud, like you said, for the past decade. So do you think that more, businesses are just finally moving to the cloud, or like, what is that shift? We're kind of like over the tipping point, I guess, in terms of cloud, because, it feels like cloud's been around forever, but obviously it's still growing. So I don't know if you have any context around, maybe businesses moving to the cloud, or, were there some kind of laggers,
Yeah,
and now everyone's finally getting there?
sure. I think as awareness increases, organizations are moving, because some organizations were kind of adamant, like, well, we're never moving to cloud. We don't need to do that. We want to keep everything local, and saying all these things. But if you go back and look at our webinar from last week, the introduction, when I did the demo, when even small business owners, when they see that and they see how quickly, and once they learn about costing, see how cheaply you can deploy these services and completely replace all this hardware and all of this rack space that you're paying, that you're renting in data centers and things like that. Once they see the difference in cost, the difference in flexibility, and I don't want to say scalability, I'll go back to rapid elasticity, how you can just shrink and expand your organization based on what the requirements are. One example of that is, if you think about an organization like Walmart or Target or whoever else competes with them, right? That's by whatever, because I don't want to get in trouble for picking one. I love Walmart and Target equally. Just put that out there. But if you think about those two big retail giants, imagine if they had a premise solution, or they were just leasing data center space from a big data center provider. Whereas when you look at Walmart and Target, I remember seeing some numbers somewhere that their revenue, like a big chunk of their revenue, most of their revenue for the year came in from the day after Thanksgiving to New Year's Day, right? Like that peak shopping time for holidays and Christmas and all that, they had more surged in than any other time the rest of the year. So let's imagine, just for scale's sake, let's just say for most of the year, they only needed one server in a data center. And then for that 30 days after Thanksgiving and up to New Year's, they suddenly needed 200 servers to service the clients for that 30-day period. In a lot of traditional models, they would have to pay for and lease space that covers the capacity that they need for that peak time, even though that peak time is only 30 days, right? Because that's just the way a lot of these contracts and a lot of the costing for data centers and things work. You have to lease that space for like a year or 6 months, whatever the case may be. Imagine if they can say, you know what, instead of spending $150 million a year to have 200 servers of rack space for the year, what if we could just spend 10 million a year, and then maybe in that 30 days we spend an additional 10 million because we have to scale up really highly, and then suddenly now that cost is a lot more variable. They have a lot more control over the variability of it, and it's not just this fixed big cost that they're absorbing for most of the year just to account for that 30 days. As organizations come to realizations like that, and they truly understand what cloud means and the benefits of it, more and more organizations are moving over. They're migrating in droves now because these things are becoming more of a reality. And I think in general, just the awareness is getting out there.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, so I think this is probably, these next two slides here, we're going to talk about who should take this certification and then, what's actually on the certification. So I would assume for those folks on the call watching it now or, on demand in the future, they're probably interested to know, is this cert right for me? As we mentioned, there's those 4 other AWS certifications, and obviously there's other cloud certifications out there. So yeah, for those folks on the call who are thinking, through that process, what would you recommend to them for if they should take this certification or not, or what kind of prerequisites or skills they should have, before they jump into this?
Yeah, for sure. So really, it's it's designed for people that have at least some exposure to networking, network engineering, solutions engineering, developers that develop applications in local environments. Like all of those people, like general IT support, IT maintenance, IT building, IT engineering, all those people are good candidates because really what it boils down to is how do we do business? How do we run our organization in a cloud environment as opposed to how we've traditionally run it locally? So anybody in your IT or your business organization that has hands-on exposure to doing things in that environment, this includes everything from break fix technicians to people that stand up machines and rebuild and provision machines, all the way to the seasoned back-end network engineers that do enterprise networking, such as building out complex routing diagrams and building out complex routing schemes and scenarios and things like that. All of those people are ideal candidates to go and sit for the certification and prepare for the certification because it proves that you can do all those things in an AWS cloud environment. Prerequisites, the cloud practitioner is a common prerequisite. We definitely say like that's a good one to start with because it gives you familiarity with some of the key AWS services. And that's going to be ideal for you to move into how do I now take all these things that I know how to do locally and move them into an AWS environment. And it's good to have that foundational knowledge of some of the key services to know how you're going to provision that. So I would say that's a good prerequisite. Working knowledge of distributed systems, that's a good prerequisite, but it's not required. I mean, you can kind of learn that on the fly. Familiarity with general networking concepts, working knowledge, all pretty much the stuff that I just talked about, like, doing locally, you need to have some familiarity with that. Now, these are recommended prerequisites. There are people that come into doing cloud technologies that never have had that background of building networks in a traditional sense. And here's why I'm okay with that. Now, again, what we have here on the screen, this is recommended. But I also want to say to people, if you don't have this, it's not necessarily required because there are some advantages to people not having that background. It's because they don't have to unlearn as many things. When you look at how we do things in a cloud environment, such as setting up networking, now it's software-defined networking. It's a completely different animal than what we deal with in building complex Cisco or Juniper backends, right? Like where we're setting up these complex routers, building these complex routing tables, and all of these things. It's a different animal when you do it in a cloud. Instead of running a bunch of commands and things like that, we can drag and drop some of those things. And all those commands are automatically ran for us once we're clear using the AWS console, for example, to explain what it is we're trying to do. So for someone that doesn't have these backgrounds, there is an upside in that they kind of learn from the ground up how to do it in a cloud environment, and they're kind of born in the cloud. Almost like if you look at most of our kids, people that are my age and older, they were born into iPads, born into laptops, born into iPhones and Androids. So these technologies are, almost intuitive for them. They don't even have to know how an application works, for example, when they're using these smart devices, because intuitively they just kind of know because they were born into it. There's definitely some of that translates to people that kind of start out in the cloud. They weren't born in a traditional network. They started out with AWS. That's a lot of that intuitiveness that we see in our kids. You see that in people that started out in cloud. So I want to just stress that these recommended prerequisites, this is what we recommend, and this is a more traditional path, but you don't have to have these to get in the cloud and start learning it.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Now let's move on to what's on the actual exam. As I mentioned in the related content section, there should be a link to the actual full AWS exam guide. So if you want to browse through that, it's always, I think, a good place to start, to really understand like what you're actually going to be tested on and, what it is that you should be learning. There's these 4 main domains, and then the sub-objectives over there, and the exam guide even has more detailed things there. So yeah, can you talk just a little bit about what's on the exam, the skills you have to learn? I don't know if there's anything you found the most challenging when you take it, or, other students take it.
Yeah, so definitely security is a big thing. Like, even though this certification doesn't have the word security in it anywhere, it's Solutions Architect Associate, there's a big emphasis on security. As you can see, 30% of the exam is based on security. So that should tell you something right there about the importance of security. Things like identity and access management, like when you set up an AWS account, how do you give proper access to it? If you're building out an enterprise, you may have a couple of thousand engineers and developers and other people that need some type of administrative or management level access to your AWS environment. How do you give that out? How do you architect that? How do you set permissions properly? How do you do these things? Because one of the biggest challenges with people moving to an AWS environment is they don't understand the environment well enough before they migrate, and they end up building out an insecure version of what they had locally. Now, this is not to say you shouldn't migrate the cloud. It's just saying that doing something like this certification puts you in a better position to understand the security implications as you migrate over. Now, with that, I'll caveat and say, yes, there are some security areas you can get yourself into, some vulnerabilities that didn't exist before cloud. So there are cloud unique vulnerabilities that you could get into that you need to know about. But also, I want to say there are security capabilities. There are things that we can do much more efficiently, much more effectively in a cloud environment than we ever could on a local or premise environment. So that's why I think a big focus, or 30% of this exam, is focused on security and building out secure solutions. Because when you think about it, what are you really doing? You're really building out virtual machines, virtual networks that simulate physical computers and physical networks. And then you're building out how they interact with each other, and you're building out storage where you store things, and then databases. Like, that's really the crux of it. So how do we secure all those things in the cloud is what this addresses. And whenever we do pen testing and stuff like that against AWS environments, some of the most common things we find are misconfigured, storage, and misconfigured or insecurely configured, networks and things like that. So security is definitely a big part of it. And you can relax on that. Like, it's not like they expect you to know these things. You're actually you're taught these things. Resilient architectures, uptime, fault tolerance, these things are really important. This is one of the primary reasons that some organizations move to cloud is because of that added resilience, that added fault tolerance, the high availability, the really, really spectacular uptimes that you can be guaranteed just based on how these distributed, cloud things work. High performance architectures. I always give a story. Like, there was one case that I worked on a few years ago, where, it was in a law firm that we were doing some forensics for, and this is dealing with item number 3 here. They came in and they had like 2 terabytes of hard drive images that had evidence on it, or they thought it did, and we had to find it. So for us to take those 2 terabyte images, put them in any machine that we could build locally, bring those images in, and when I say images, I mean, think of it as a photo or a snapshot in time of a hard drive, right? So we had that. To bring that into a local machine, the most powerful one we could build, it was going to take about 3 days to successfully import that into the forensic suite we were using, and another 2 weeks to do proper analysis, text searching, and all the other forensics analysis that we do. going into AWS, I was able to build out a machine that was, I think, I picked 3 or 4 terabytes of RAM, like 200 and something processors, and I think like 8 terabytes of storage. I was able to use a service in Amazon called Snowmobile, where we could or actually, yeah, Snowmobile, where we could actually bring out. Um, they send out a courier. We send that hard drive into AWS. It goes to data center. They take that terabyte drive, upload it into your account, and within a day or so, now you have access to that data in the cloud. So doing that, I was able to, instead of taking 3 or 4 days to import that image, I was able to import that image in like an hour. And instead of taking 2 to 3 weeks to do all the analysis, I was able to do that in like 6 hours. So now for that law firm, we were able to guarantee them a turnaround of like 48 hours versus like 3 weeks. Now, of course, I was able to charge a premium for that express service. And I think our AWS charges ended up being somewhere around like $2,000 for the whole 2 days that we use it, which is still puts me way in the green as far as much as I could charge. So that's an example of where you have high performing architectures in the cloud that you just can't build locally without incurring millions of dollars in cost. And you only have to pay for it for the amount of time that you're using it. So that's to me one of the most important parts of this. And then obviously the last, designing cost optimized architectures, because as I just described, for that 2 or 3 days, we're in like some grands, some thousands of dollars. If you don't build it out properly, if you don't think about cost optimization and understand when you need to use what, when do we need to store things in long-term storage, which is a lot cheaper than frequently accessed storage. Like all of these are lessons and scenarios that you learn about when you're building out an AWS environment. And that for design cost optimized architectures is where you kind of get into that. So these 4 topics, these 4 domains really round it out and set you up to where you can, confidently build these things out in a cost effective way. Because when you hear stories of organizations saying, well, yeah, we migrated to the cloud and now we're spending, 30% more than we were when we were on premise. Sometimes it's because of that particular business model and what they do. It's just going to be more costly. But oftentimes you find it's because they didn't really have a good grasp of all these principles when they were building and migrating into AWS. They just jumped without learning. So what we're saying is do the certifications, build out the skill set first, and then migrate. But yeah, these are the exam things, and I kind of wanted to touch on why they're all really important.
Yeah, that was great. We have about 5 minutes left, so I think we should probably explain the boot camps for anyone who's interested. Obviously, there's multiple ways you can train for AWS certifications, but as we mentioned up top and in the first webinar, we're now an authorized training provider for these AWS live boot camps. So for those on the call who are interested in those skills that you were talking about and getting certified, can you explain a little bit, what they can expect in this live boot camp, how it works, all that good stuff?
Yeah, for sure. So with our boot camps, we do offer 90-day extended access to boot camp materials. This includes recordings of the boot camp that you were in. It also includes curated recordings of other boot camps that that have run previously around the topic. 100% satisfaction guarantee, exam pass, exam voucher. You have free 90 days to our spectacular skills subscription, which is really, you get access to our full library of training content. So we have over 1,400 courses in there. This includes everything from AWS to other cloud technologies like Microsoft Azure. We have some Google Cloud stuff in there. Everything you can imagine: cybersecurity, reverse engineering, exploit writing, pen testing, just all of the cyber and technology training we have in our portfolio. And you get access to all of that for 90 days past the AWS Bootcamp, which is great because a lot of times when you go and learn things, you find that you have gaps. You now have 90 days to go back and fill those gaps with our award-winning content free of charge. So these are some of the great benefits from taking the bootcamp. And obviously, you'll be set up to pass the Solutions Architect Associate exam.
Awesome. I see we have a couple of questions. If anyone else has any, feel free to drop them in. Um, yeah, one person is asking, is this certification too advanced for someone who's brand new to IT and cybersecurity? I know you talked a little bit about that, but a lot of folks are obviously, you know, some people come from IT, some people are looking to transition. I know we've heard lots of stories of people moving from completely unrelated careers into IT and cybersecurity. Any, recommended they should jump right into this one, or do anything else first to kind of test the waters before they jump to this one?
Yeah, so I would say for someone that's brand new to IT and brand new to cyber, right? Because some people have IT experience and they're just new to cyber. Some people are new to both. If you're new to both, I would strongly suggest you take the cloud, learn the cloud practitioner body of knowledge first, and then move into this one. Because this one's going to be very hands-on. It's going to require you to actually build out solutions and things like that. So I would definitely say start with the cloud practitioner to get you the background knowledge that you may be missing, and then move into this. A lot of the other cyber background, a lot of the other IT background, you don't necessarily need that to start building out these solutions in cloud. I almost prefer people that have no background. If they're going to go and work in an AWS environment, I almost prefer they don't bother with trying to get traditional IT experience at first, because a lot of that background and experience that you need, you can get that while learning how to build solutions in the cloud. I'm not a fan of the double learning. Like, if there's no clearly defined reason for you to go and learn how to crimp network cables and the different types of network cables that you use in different types of network scenarios, there is no need for that if you're going to be building out networks in the cloud. So I'm not a fan of you wasting time learning that, right? These are things we all learned back in the day. But again, the applicability to a cloud environment is just not there. So I prefer, and you won't hear this from everybody, like a lot of people say, well, no, you need to go learn about traditional networks first. Just not 100% on that bandwagon. Like, I feel like if you're brand new to all of it, start with cloud practitioner and kind of work your way up from there.
Yeah, we have another question about the fact that a lot of jobs, they don't just want the certifications, they also want the real life experience. So any advice there for how people would be able to get a job after getting this AWS certification?
So the thing is so one of the things that we do that we like about the way we're rolling this out is you do get lots of hands-on, with the skills builder and all the AWS environments. So I kind of look at that way, like look at it as kind of like it's a thing that we that sets you up for a job. Because if you look at the gaps now and the ads for jobs, they're looking for people that have, and this is key, demonstrable AWS skills, like you can demonstrate your skill set.
Yeah, and then last question before we wrap up. What about folks who maybe aren't sure what cloud ecosystem they'll be using? Obviously, there's AWS, there's Azure, there's others. I know there's different cloud certifications out there, some that are vendor neutral, some that are specific to AWS. Do you think it's worth it for people to get AWS if they're not sure that the job they'll be pursuing has AWS, or is it applicable, skills, kind of wide? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Which one was that?
Yeah, because obviously, there's IC squared has the IC2 has the CCSP, like the cloud security professional. So just if I'm thinking, hey, I want to work in the cloud, but I don't know what my future job is. It going to be AWS? Is it going to be Azure? Is it going to be Google Cloud? Just wondering if there's any kind of crossover between the AWS certifications, or if I should wait until I know I'm for sure working in the AWS ecosystem. Now let me jump in and get AWS certified.
Yeah, I think that, so the IC squared CCSP, that's my preferred starting point. If you have no cloud knowledge whatsoever, because it is generic, it's vendor neutral, right? So it's kind of just spread out to where you kind of get a glimpse into cloud technologies in general. So I like that certification as a body of knowledge to start with. And then as you get into it and you kind of have a feel for which direction you're going, then you can kind of pick between Amazon, Microsoft and Google, the three bigger ones that have, certifications. But, if you spend some time doing CCSP and you get to a point you still don't know, then, I mean, Amazon, AWS is the leading cloud service out there, right? So
Awesome. Yeah.
I don't think you can go wrong going in that direction first if you don't have any other criteria to decide.
Awesome. Well, we are out of time. Appreciate everyone for joining us today. A reminder that over the next couple of weeks, we'll be talking about those other 3 certifications. So if you're interested in those, register for those webinars and check them out. But yeah, with that, I'll give a thanks to Keytron and big thank you to everyone for joining us today. As we wrap up, a very short survey will appear, and we greatly appreciate your thoughts if you can fill that out so we know what you like about this webinar and what topics you're interested in the future. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.